Hollywood art directors spent months creating album covers that would define careers. They sketched concepts, pitched ideas, and fought for creative vision. But in 1991, one album cover became something else entirely. A declaration of war wrapped in circus imagery that the music industry completely misunderstood. And here's what most people don't know. The cover they eventually used wasn't even Michael Jackson's first choice. There was a completely different design that got rejected, and the reason why reveals exactly what Michael was trying to tell the world. I'm about to show you why this album cover wasn't just art, it was a message, and trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at that image the same way again. Let's dive in. Let me paint the picture for you. In 1991, Michael Jackson was at a crossroads. The bad era had been massive, 125 million albums sold worldwide. But something was shifting. The industry was changing. New Jack Swing was taking over. Hip-hop was exploding, and Michael knew he needed to evolve or get left behind. But here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't just about the music. This was about control. Michael had been fighting with Sony for years over creative decisions, marketing strategies, and most importantly, ownership. The Dangerous album wasn't just his next record, it was his statement of independence. The timing of this fight matters more than people realize. In 1991, Prince had just written "Slave" on his face in protest of Warner Brothers. George Michael was suing Sony Music for artistic freedom. The entire industry was watching these battles play out in public, and labels were terrified of losing control. Michael knew this. He understood that every major artist who'd tried to break free had been punished for it. Careers had been destroyed, albums had been shelved, distribution had been blocked. The music industry in 1991 didn't just sell records, it controlled narratives. And Michael was about to challenge that system in the most public way possible. So, when it came time to design the cover, Michael didn't go to the usual corporate art departments. He went to Mark Ryden, a relatively unknown artist at the time, someone working in the lowbrow art movement, creating surrealist paintings that mixed childhood innocence with dark undertones. Ryden had never done an album cover before. He wasn't a commercial designer, he was a fine artist. And that's exactly why Michael wanted him. The meeting between Michael and Ryden happened in early 1991 at Michael's Neverland Ranch. Ryden later described walking through the property surrounded by actual circus equipment, carnival rides, and exotic animals. Michael wasn't just using circus imagery as a metaphor, he was living inside it. He'd literally built his own circus. But here's what Ryden noticed immediately. Michael controlled everything at Neverland. The rides ran when he wanted. The animals lived where he decided. The circus existed on his terms. That's when Ryden understood what Michael wanted on the cover. Not a circus he performed in, a circus he owned. Now, here's the kicker. Ryden created an elaborate painting for the Dangerous cover. A massive, detailed work featuring Michael surrounded by circus imagery, animals, and hidden symbols. But Sony took one look at it and said no. Too weird, too dark, too uncommercial. They wanted something safer. Something that would sell in Walmart and Target without raising eyebrows. But Michael pushed back. He knew what he was doing. This wasn't about making the label comfortable. This was about sending a message to everyone who thought they could control him. The back and forth lasted weeks. Sony's art department created mock-ups of what they wanted. Simple, clean, Michael's face, maybe a leather jacket, something that screamed pop music and nothing else. Michael rejected every single one. He told them if they wanted to sell Dangerous, they'd sell it with his vision on the cover, not theirs. This was the same battle Prince was fighting, the same battle George Michael would fight in court for years. But Michael had something they didn't. He had leverage. He was the biggest selling artist in Sony's entire catalog, and he knew it. Think about what that means. Michael Jackson, the biggest pop star on the planet, fighting with his own record label over album artwork. This wasn't about ego. This was about artistic freedom. And the cover that finally got approved, the one millions of people saw in record stores, was actually a compromise, a toned-down version of what Michael really wanted to say. But that's not all. Let's break down what's actually on that cover, because every single element means something. The central image shows Michael's eyes peering through an ornate frame, surrounded by P.T. Barnum-style circus poster imagery. There are animals, monkeys, dogs, exotic birds. There's a ringmaster. There are flames. And buried in all of it are symbols that point to exactly what Michael was experiencing. Here's where it gets deeply personal. The circus imagery wasn't random. Michael grew up in show business as a child performer, literally put on display for audiences. The Jackson 5 toured constantly. They performed in Vegas. They were managed, marketed, and sold like a product. And Michael never forgot what that felt like. To be the attraction, the spectacle, the thing people paid to see. Joe Jackson, Michael's father, managed the Jackson 5 like a circus act. Rehearsals were brutal. Performances were non-stop. There was no childhood, only the show. Michael talked about this in interviews years later, how he'd watch other kids playing outside while he practiced dance moves until his feet bled. That's the circus he grew up in, one he didn't choose, one he couldn't escape. And by 1991, he was making damn sure everyone understood he'd broken free from that tent. So when he chose circus imagery for Dangerous, he was making a direct comparison. The music industry is a circus. Artists are the performers, labels are the ringmasters, and the audience pays to watch. But here's the twist. In this circus, Michael was taking back control. He wasn't just the performer anymore. He was directing the show. But wait, there's more buried in this cover that nobody talks about. Look closely at the animals. Monkeys, parrots, dogs. In the entertainment industry, these have always been symbols of performers who do tricks on command. Trained animals who perform when told. And Michael was surrounded by them on this cover, but he wasn't one of them. His eyes stare straight out at you, unflinching, in control. The choice of animals wasn't accidental either. Michael specifically requested certain species be included. The baboon on the left side of the cover, that was deliberate. In Victorian-era circus posters, baboons were presented as almost human curiosities, dressed in clothes, made to perform human behaviors. Think about the parallel. Michael had spent his entire childhood being presented as a curiosity. A child who could sing and dance like an adult, a black kid performing for predominantly white audiences. The exploitation wasn't subtle, it was the business model. Director and cultural critic Nelson George said something about this era that really stuck. He said Michael was fighting to own his image in ways that black artists before him never could. Think about what that means. Every element of this cover, from the circus imagery to the regal frame around Michael's face, was about reclaiming power. The industry wanted to frame him as a novelty, a spectacle, something exotic and strange. Michael took that frame and made it his crown. This is where it gets interesting. The original Mark Ryden design that got rejected was even more explicit. It featured Michael in full ringmaster attire, literally holding the whip, standing above the circus rather than inside it. Sony looked at that image and knew exactly what it meant. Michael wasn't just performing in their circus anymore. He was running his own show, and that terrified them. The compromise cover kept the circus imagery, but made it more ambiguous. The animals stayed, the flames stayed, but Michael's position became less clear. Was he the ringmaster or the attraction? The genius is that Michael made it work both ways. To casual fans, it looked like elaborate pop art. To industry insiders, it was a declaration. What makes this even more powerful is the color scheme Michael insisted on. Gold and red dominate the cover. In color psychology, gold represents wealth, power, and royalty. Red represents passion, danger, and revolution. Together, they create a visual language that screams defiance. Compare that to the bad cover, which was mostly black and white. Stark, simple, safe. Dangerous was anything but safe. Every color choice was intentional. Every design element was calculated. There's also the eye imagery itself, which deserves its own analysis. Michael's eyes are the only part of his face visible on the cover. Everything else is obscured by the elaborate frame and circus elements. But those eyes, they're unavoidable. They follow you. They don't blink. They don't look away. In portrait art, eye contact creates psychological engagement. It forces the viewer to acknowledge the subject as an equal. Michael wasn't asking for your attention. He was demanding your respect, and he did it with nothing but a direct stare that said, "I see you seeing me, and I'm not backing down." Now, here's where it gets even better. The Dangerous album cover became a blueprint for how Michael would operate for the rest of his career. Every subsequent album cover, History, Invincible, they all featured Michael in positions of power. Statues, monuments, kings. He was done being the performing monkey. He was rewriting the narrative. Music journalist Touré analyzed this shift years later and pointed out something crucial. He said that Michael's visual presentation after Dangerous was all about confronting the industry's attempt to diminish him. The covers got more aggressive, more political, more direct. And it all started with this circus imagery that people thought was just weird pop art. But that's not all. There's one more element on the dangerous cover that reveals Michael's entire strategy. Hidden in the ornate frame around his eyes are subtle references to royalty, gold leaf patterns, crown imagery, Baroque designs associated with European monarchy. Michael wasn't just fighting to be respected as an artist, he was claiming his throne as the king of pop. And he was doing it visually before he ever said it out loud. Here's the truth about why this cover matters so much. In 1991, music videos and album covers were still the primary way artists communicated their image. There was no Instagram, no Twitter, no direct fan access. If you wanted to control your narrative, you did it through your art. And Michael used every inch of that dangerous cover to tell the industry exactly where he stood. Let me break down exactly what an outside observer, someone who didn't understand the context, could never see in this cover. They could never recognize the P.T. Barnum reference as a commentary on exploitation. Barnum was famous for presenting human beings as curiosities, for profiting off spectacle. Michael knew that history. They could never understand the animal symbolism as a rejection of the performing artist stereotype, the trained seal who claps on command, the dancing bear who entertains. Michael surrounded himself with those images to show what he refused to be. They could never see the regal framing as a power move against Sony's ownership claims. Every gold flourish, every Baroque detail was Michael saying, "This is my art, my image, my legacy." They could never connect the circus theme to Michael's actual childhood trauma of being displayed and managed from age 5. This wasn't abstract art theory. This was lived experience. They could never interpret the direct eye contact as confrontation. Most pop stars on album covers look away, look dreamy, look unthreatening. Michael stares straight at you, unflinching, demanding recognition. They could never decode the Victorian-era poster aesthetic as a deliberate throwback to when entertainment meant human exhibition, freak shows, exotic displays. Michael was saying, "You've always treated artists this way, and I'm done pretending it's okay. Here's exactly how to think about it. An album cover sells music. The dangerous cover sold a manifesto. There's a fundamental difference. Most artists in 1991 put their face on an album and called it a day. Michael created a visual essay about power, control, and artistic freedom, and it hung in every record store in America. After fighting with Sony for months over the artwork, the message got delivered anyway. Dangerous sold 32 million copies worldwide, and every single person who bought it took home Michael's Declaration of Independence, whether they understood it or not. So remember that rejected Mark Ryden design I mentioned at the beginning, the one that was too explicit. It was Michael literally holding the whip, standing above the circus. Sony said no, because they knew exactly what it meant. Michael was done performing on their terms. The compromise cover that got approved kept the circus, but made Michael's position ambiguous enough for plausible deniability. But anyone who knew the industry, anyone who understood the war Michael was fighting, saw it immediately. And Mark Ryden's public support years later, calling it one of the most meaningful projects of his career, that was the final confirmation that they'd created exactly what they intended. A Trojan horse, beautiful enough to get approved, subversive enough to deliver the message. The Dangerous album cover wasn't just the best choice for that record, it was the only choice. Because nobody else would have fought that hard to put a circus metaphor on a pop album. Nobody else would have risked commercial appeal to make a political statement. Nobody else carried both the industry knowledge and the personal experience to make every element mean something. This cover wasn't designed, it was weaponized. So, there you have it. The real reason the Dangerous album cover looked the way it did. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.